Guys, welcome back to the channel. Tell you what, man, I'm dying to go fishing. Been on graveyard for about 3 or 4 nights in a row, but I tell you what, it's gonna happen soon. But I've been thinking, I get a lot of these questions about, what is the beam angle? How large is it? Why can't I see my bait in, when it's out there at 40 feet or 30 feet or 20 feet? And I think people need to have a better understanding of the beam width, and why that, for example, you can see your things disappear at further distances although the beam is wider. So let's take a look at that right now. You know what, we're going back to the whiteboard, baby. I'm finna draw it up, and you know how great my art skills are. They're amazing. Let's go. All right, guys, welcome back. Gotta get my old butt down here. I need a stand. That's what I need. I need like one of those art stands, like I don't know what you call them. But okay, first of all, what we need to understand is the beam is 135 degrees. And when I say 135 degrees, that is the width of it. When you put it in, for example, forward mode, it goes forward and it angles back at 135 degrees. This whole coverage area right here is 135 degrees. That is a pretty wide swath. That's why you can see forward and you can see somewhat behind the boat. If you turn your reverse range off, which is what I like to do in bass fishing, a lot of times all it's doing is taking the fish finder and chopping this portion off. It's still back there, but it's turning it off. So that's something that's pretty nifty to do, but that's not what we're here for today. What we're here for today is to talk about beam width. Now this is how far out in front of the boat it does and how far backwards. But width is essentially that right there. Here's the boat. It's pointing out in front of the boat. Now, at 5 feet, for example, if you're fishing vertical fishing, and you've got a 10-foot rod and you're sitting in your you got a 10-foot rod and you're fishing straight out, straight down, you probably aren't reaching but about 5 feet out in front of the boat. And at 5 feet, you only have 1 foot in 1.8 foot of actual coverage area. So it is very easy for your jig, if you're holding it out in front of the boat in this 5 foot area right here. When you're 5 foot in front of the boat, it is 1.8 feet wide. That's not very much width to catch your jig in. So yes, a lot of times people say, man, I can't see my jig. You don't have to miss it by much. I mean, 1 foot 8 inches is right there. That is 1 foot 8 inches at 5 foot in front of the boat. If you're off just slightly, or your lineup, if you think your transducer is pointing straight and is slightly off to the left or right, and you think you have it, you could completely miss it. Now here's something that we'll talk about just a second. As we get to 10 foot, it doubles in size to about 3.6 foot. Now that's a pretty large area. It's about this wide, so you're seeing it about this wide. But here's the thing. On the edges, those returns aren't going to be as strong. And so if it's 3.6 foot wide at 10 feet, in reality, it's probably about 2.7, 2.8 feet. So you lose a little bit here. The returns are just not that strong. The area where it's going to be strong is right in this middle area. And using that knowledge of something is strong or not strong, and there being bright returns, you can determine how perfectly lined up your transducer is. A lot of times when I see my jig, I'll turn left and right just a little bit, and when I get it that real bright return, then I'll stand up and make sure my transducer is perfectly aligned. It doesn't take much. You can bump it. There's several things. You can turn slightly on the on the pole or the trolling motor, but still at 10 feet, it's only about 2.5 to 3 feet wide, and with the edges being very they're not returned. Now, when you get to 20 foot, it is 7.2 foot wide. That's a pretty large area. You're still talking about 6.5 foot, even if you take away these areas right here. Now, that leaves about 6.5 foot in the center right there for your strongest returns. But as we grow in distance, as we get out here to the 40 and even the 80 foot, that wide cone starts to actually work against you. And you say, how does that work against you? You have a wider area. You got to realize, okay, if let's say we're at 40 foot, this is where it's picking up, and your jig is right there, slightly off center. It can be centered, but slightly off center. The jig is not the only thing in this beam at 40 foot. There could be a fish. There could be a tree coming up off the bottom right there. There could be a lot of things. So sometimes when you can't see your jig, it doesn't mean the jig's not in the beam. There are just other things. You're trying to take a three-dimensional environment and turn it into two-dimensional. That's what Livescope is. It gives the appearance of three-dimensional, but it's still two-dimensional. It's just height and width. I mean, you're seeing out, you're seeing up and down. You don't have a three-dimensional. Until they can ever build one of those, that would be an awesome fish finder, but I'm not sure that's ever even possible. You'd have to have a 3D printer print out the environment down there, and that'd be very hard. So just because your jig's at 40 foot and it's in the center of the beam doesn't mean that it's always going to show up perfectly, because this whole area, which is 14 foot wide, it's got 14 foot of area that it's trying to show on a screen. So yes, your jig may be at 40 foot or your spinnerbait or a rig, but there's also other things at 40 foot. If you've got two jigs at 40 foot, it's not going to show both jigs at 40 foot because they're literally in the same field of view. Yes, if one's higher than the other, yes. But if you have a jig in the beam and they're both in the same height path, you can't show both. Both of them being side. If you have a log that's coming up off the bottom, right there, and here's 40 foot right here, and your jig's coming across right here at 40 foot, there's an intersection point where the jig and the log both can't show up on the screen. So it can't show both because they're both in the same area in the same beam. So some of the things that help you, the wider beam, the more distance, also hurt you because there's so much of an area. At 40 foot, there's all of this water column and all of this water column. So just because your jig doesn't show up all the time or show up perfectly doesn't mean it's not in the beam or your transducer is not reading correctly. Remember, it's 14 foot wide, and say if you're in 15 foot of water, you got 14 foot left to right, and you also got 0 to 15 top to bottom. That's a lot of space trying to show in a two-dimensional view. And I hope that understands. It is very tricky to understand. But a lot of people think, man, my jig's coming back and it just kind of disappears at 40 foot. Well, there could be it could be another fish that swam across there that it picked up. It could be turbulence in the water that causes it to do it. It's not always the transducer, and it's not always the software program. It's just the limits in the fact that it's a two-dimensional view trying to show a three-dimensional world. Guys, I hope that helps. And thank you for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thank you for liking the videos. But you must ring that bell.